Welcome to Blueprints for Liberty, Designing the Freedom Cities of Tomorrow. This is a podcast that explores the visionary concept of freedom cities and how we can create living environments that prioritize individual liberty, social harmony, and equal opportunities for all. We look back through history to see how the past informs the future and how people can self-organize in their communities to support self-sufficiency. We also look to develop leaders that are moral and ethical in a world that is spinning out of control. Tune in to be part of the conversation shaping the future of our communities. Hello, and welcome back to part two. We're with Zara Starchild today, and we had a conversation the other day about knowing thyself and coming to a better understanding of, I don't know how to put this into a high level category, but it has to do with energy. So I'll let her jump in again for a second and kind of introduce what we were talking about. And today we talked a lot about practical application in terms of how understanding this energy industry. I hate to use the word industry, but that's kind of what comes to my mind because I'm a business person coming from a business background, and how it affects us in our everyday personal lives, but also, we'll talk a little bit today about how it affects us in our business endeavors. So go ahead, Zara, take it from here.
Wonderful. Thanks for that introduction, Cheryl. So hello again, everyone. My name is Zara Starchild. I am a international energy healer, coach, guide to awakening to your multidimensional self, your multidimensional bodies, and just gaining greater access to your higher self, your higher guidance, and your divine mission, your divine blueprint, your divine plan for your life. And I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to talk with you and with beautiful Cheryl here, who has such a amazingly warm heart. So let's get going on practical applications of knowing thyself. We talked a little bit about some theoretical stuff about it in our last conversation. And what is it exactly, right? So knowing thyself, I need to talk about it, I think, first from the platform of limitation, what we think we know about ourselves. Firstly, I want to share that most people think of themselves as this singular, individualized unit. I know who I am. This is who I am. This is how I behave. This is how I react. This is what I think. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I'm not capable of because of whatever physical, mental, emotional, socioeconomical status that I might have. And so what I'm really here to share with you is that you are so much bigger than you have any idea. And each time that you expand your consciousness into knowing yourself, knowing who you actually truly are, that sense of evolution and expansion on how big you are becomes even bigger. So there's no end to knowing thyself. There's only areas of growth. There's only stepping into the next platform of who you are becoming. And in the who you are becoming, it requires that you let go of some of the aspects of who you've always been. And this is often very triggering to people because our personality self, our ego self, is very invested in who we are and what we know and how we do things and in our identity. And so whenever we challenge that ego personality of who we are, it will inevitably bring to you, attract to us the mirrors of reality to reinforce what we already believe about ourselves. And so through self-awareness, with the intention of knowing who I am, we can begin to look at some of the very loud beliefs that limit who we can become. And so we want to talk about knowing who we are. Why in our practical life? What happens? Why do we want to know who we are? I don't think that there's anyone out there in the entire world, except maybe some sort of avatar, aesthetic Buddha already, that is entirely at peace and satisfaction in regards to every aspect of their life. So if and when we become aware of an area of our life that we desire more from, more love, more joy, more friendship, more connection, more money, more abundance, more opportunity, more freedom, more travel, bigger house, nicer car, greater connection with family, whatever area of your life, maybe it's health, right? Physical health, physical well-being, losing excess weight, feeling great in our body. Whatever area of your life is presenting itself to you in your consciousness for an upgrade, that's the area that our soul is inviting us to investigate all of the previous blocks, limitations, and ideas that we might have about ourselves in this area. And so it's the desire for more, the desire for expansion, the desire for upliftment, the desire for growth, even though we might not label it as growth. It's growth in a way that you're growing more of what you want. Now, we talked about on the last podcast, we talked about we talked about focusing. When we focus our concentration, when we focus our energy into the problem, which is basically what we do not want, when we're in the problem with our headspace, with our thoughts, with our attention, the problem is what we do not want. So for instance, I want to lose 20 pounds. What I do not want is to be in the body that is 20 pounds overweight, that feels restrictive, that feels heavy, that feels lethargic, that feels uncomfortable in her clothes. So when I'm focusing my attention, awareness, and energy in the vibration frequency of the problem, such as, oh, I'm so uncomfortable. Oh, I'm so fat. Oh, I'm feeling ugly. I'm feeling fat. I'm feeling lethargic. I don't want to get up. I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to do these things that I know that I need to do in order to drop this weight, in order to feel better. But instead, I'm in this, like, I can't do it, or it's too much, it's too heavy. All of my family is overweight. All of the genetics are overweight. This is just how we are. This is what we do. These are the foods that we've always eaten. And so I need to continue. That's who we are, but that's not actually who we are. We are not actually the pattern that our family, our parents, our culture, our small tribe, we're not the patterns that have been created around us in regards to how we live. We are not those things. But when our headspace is in the problem and creating the reasons why we have this problem, then we're in that vibration of perpetuating that problem. And so we talked about in our last conversation, pulling our energy out of the problem and into the vibration of the solution. And if the solution is losing 20 pounds, we need to go there with our vision, with our imagination. We need to begin to dream what it would be like, what it would feel like to have already accomplished what it is that we're wanting to accomplish. And it could be losing 20 pounds, or it could be running a 6-figure business or having a 6-figure income. It could be any particular topic that's coming up from the depths of your soul that's desiring change, evolution, expansion, growth. And in order to achieve that expansion and growth, we need to go into the energy of what it would feel like to be there already. So, an example from my own life is when I was a teenager, I looked around at my family, and we would all get together very often. It was a big family. We would get together a lot. We would go up to this summer camp on the lake on weekends when I was growing up, and we would visit for holidays and weekends and Sunday lunch, and all of that stuff was going on. And at some point in my teenage years, I began to realize that all of my family, all of the adults in my family, were obese, severely obese, minus a couple, right? And I started to recognize at this age that this is not the reality that I want for myself. This is not what I want to become. And so I started to get the understanding that I needed to change certain behaviors, certain patterns that I had learned in my first 15 years of my life, say, certain patterns, certain ways of eating, certain foods that we were eating. I needed to change something because I was already overweight for my age. And so I began the quest. And I'm nearly 50 years old now, and I have managed my entire life to maintain a certain weight, okay? A certain weight, which is probably about between 20 and 50 pounds over what society says my ideal weight should be. But I've been able to maintain that. So basically what I'm saying is I never became that 300-pound person that was potentially laid out for me if I continued to follow the path of my ancestors and the patterning that was given to me at that young age. And now, again, at 50 years old, I still struggle. That's the wrong words to use. I'm still dissolving. Let's put it that way. I'm still dissolving some of these old patterns that are not me. They're not who I am. I behave this way sometimes. I overeat sometimes. I sometimes overeat to the point of being so full and so uncomfortable that I don't like myself anymore. But I've shifted and dissolved so much of that. So it's not like a regular basis anymore. It's just on occasion, right? And so this is what I'm talking about. There are patterns within our being that are unconscious, that knowing thyself, looking into why am I behaving this way? Where did this come from? Is this how I want to behave? If I continue to behave this way, where will it lead me? If I shift my behavior slightly in this direction, in the direction of where I want to go, I would be more prone to getting to where I want to go, to becoming who I want to be. So what I'm saying here is that who we think we are is an illusion. It is a energetic matrix of our ancestral patterning, our ancestral beliefs, our ancestral behavior, and then the tribal behavior that expands outward into our local communities, our neighborhoods, and then even further into our gender, into our race, into our country, our culture of our country. These are patterns of behavior, patterns of thinking, patterns of feeling that we inherited, that we've been taught, that we've been conditioned to believe are actually right. or are actually our reality, when in fact, they're all just thought forms. They're all just mental energy that we put our power into. And so when we start to decode, and I use these words decode because that's really what it is. If you think of it like a computer program, like our brains are very much like computers, and you put a program into the brain and the brain says, okay, I get that. Okay, we'll continue to do that. That's the pathway. That's how to do it. And we do the same thing over and over and over and over again. And that becomes who we are. That becomes who we think we are. That becomes who we identify with. And all of these identifiers are limitations on who we can become. And I think that little channel is complete. So I'm going to toss that back to you, Cheryl, and let you riff on whatever feels right for you.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good summation of what we talked about and a good example. And I think the first thought that comes to my mind, goes back to my religious upbringing. And I was taught from a very young age that I was a child of God. And I was like, that's cool. Didn't think too much about it. And as time went on and I got older and married and had my own kids, and they were taught that they were children of God, I was like, that's cool. But then one day it hit me, and I thought, when you think about, and I watch a lot of period historical, TV, I don't know what you want to call it. And when someone is born into royalty, they are anointed from the time they are young to be royalty. And so they grow up with this, and this isn't the right word, but this entitlement mentality that I am now royalty and I need to behave like royalty and I need to live out and manifest this lineage that I was born into. And that had its pluses and its minuses. There was, depending on how that played out.
I just
But
entered just a thought into that.
mhm,
They believe that they're entitled because they're royal. And because of their belief, the entire world mirrors back to them
mhm,
that entitlement and that status.
yes.
And that goes for everybody. So if
Mhm,
you're in the same space of poverty, then the world, if you're still believing that you are destitute and that you're destined to always perpetuate that poverty and that scarcity, then the entire world around you mirrors that back to you.
yes.
Anyways, yeah,
No,
continue.
that's exactly. So, it can work whether you're royalty or whether you are, in poverty. And I, in my religious upbringing, everybody, whether you were born into poverty, whether you were born into royalty, it didn't matter. You are a child of God. And God on some level is seen as royalty. He's seen as, the supreme being. And when we recognize that we are, whether you believe in God or not, if you look at yourself as a child of deity and that you have the potential to become like that deity, then it's unlimited what you can become. And, whether you're looking at it from a religious perspective or you don't believe that people can really become like God isn't really the point. The point is, if I believe that I don't have any limitations placed on what my potential is, then I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure, and that includes getting rid of limiting beliefs, that I will be able to, achieve whatever it is that I desire. And because I come like from a business background quite a bit, I've been an independent consultant and worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies or, large government agencies or whatever, these big behemoth organizations. And there's a lot of criticism of these organizations. Their focus is on whether it's a for-profit business, we're going to make as much money as possible, we're going to maximize shareholder, what our shareholders receive, and that's their goal from a for-profit perspective. If you're a government agency, uh, yes, this is really true, and I've worked in government enough to know you want to grow government because that's your business, is growing government. And I've known enough that if at the end of your fiscal year, if you haven't spent all your money, you have to make sure you spend it all, because if you don't, you lose it. And, and then there's certain metrics built into various government organizations that, you need to, and this happens to be more so well, it's in all of them, but an example is like the FBI. We have to make sure that we close so many cases, which you would think, okay, that's a good thing. We want to make sure that we're catching all of the criminals. But sometimes when you have to create criminals to catch criminals, then, you're growing your organization. So to everything, there is an upside and a downside. So I'm not saying whether for-profit or government or anything's right or wrong, but the goal is always to grow your environment, whether that's a financial environment or, in government, I don't know what you call that kind of environment, but whatever it is. And so what makes me think is I've gone down this road of building a program. It's called Harmonic Leadership. And it's talking about how we're moving into a new realm of business, especially with, artificial intelligence, Web3, crypto, all of these different types of technologies that are new. And some people are just scared to death of them, rightfully so. There's the potential to do a lot of harm with these types of things. And then there's those that are like, no, this is great. And I remember, when the internet first came out, everybody's like, oh, the internet's going to be the most horrible thing, and I was kind of like, well, I can see that and there have been a lot of really dark things that happen on the internet. I guess that's where there's a space called the dark web. But on the flip side, I mean, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now if it weren't for the internet.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a lot of really good things that have come out of it. And so what I'm trying to do is build this idea between this quiet leadership, servant leadership, conscious leadership idea, that combining business practices with these ancient wisdom, spiritual principles, know thyself first, kind of idea, we can create a more meaningful and purpose-driven approach, to running these organizations. And, mindfulness plays a role in all of this. And it focuses first and foremost, as we've said, on self-awareness, and then authenticity, but also ethical decision making. So when we go down these roads, I think when we know ourselves and we're true to ourselves, that it becomes easier when we are in these ethical and moral dilemmas to come out of them on the side of creating good as opposed to creating bad. Because we don't want to create anything bad for ourselves. So why would we want to create anything bad for people around us? To me, that seems like a natural extension. Am I off in left field here? What do you think?
I think that you're onto something there. And what I'm noticing is you said that you've studied a lot and put a lot of your attention and awareness into like historical programs and learning about history. And that's a fascinating topic for you. I've had the same experience only through, spirituality. I've always been studying, like I went to Deepak Chopra, I went to Michael Beckwith Revelations, what are they called? Conferences, and, a lot of spiritual movies, teachings, documentaries, all of this stuff. And one of the things that struck me so much that it's been ringing actually since we've been together is this line that Deepak Chopra said in the conference that I went to in New York City. He said, now that we have this technology and he held up a smartphone, he said, now that we have this technology in our pockets that could take down an airplane, it is imperative that we evolve our human consciousness so that that kind of action, that kind of experience of being able to take down an airplane is no longer even a thought in the human collective. And it speaks into what you're saying, is that this technology is here to serve our human evolution, our human consciousness. And our human consciousness in this human evolution we're at this really interesting point in our human evolution, that if we do not shift our consciousness back into the ancient wisdoms, which is for the benefit of all, for the benefit of all people, for the benefit of all sentient being, then we're in the process of dismantling and our ability to survive on this planet. Like since the 70s and 80s, since plastics were introduced into the world, and I'm not even talking about, we don't even need to talk about global warming or climate change or whatever label they want to put on it now. There are microplastics in the waters that we drink, in the fish that we eat from the drinking of the water. So like this idea of growth for the sake of growth that has been a pattern in human consciousness is basically making our home planet inhabitual. It's creating our home planet. There's a word there. It's making our home planet unable to sustain a healthy lifespan. Now, when you look at the Bible, they had in the very beginning of that Bible in the New Testament, people were living to 300, 400, 500 years old. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't it be amazing to know that you've got 300, 500 years ahead of you to continue to grow, evolve, expand into whatever it is, or learn, right? Like, just amazing. But we've created our physical environments and the earth that we live in to be in a place where it's not supporting the optimal health of our physical vessels here. And so our average lifespan, 80, 90 years old, I would say, right? Sometimes we're reaching 100, but those 80 to 100 years are not necessarily a high quality of life. So we're talking about, you've got about 70 years, 80 years if you're lucky, of a good quality life where you're experiencing the world from a healthy vessel. And that is due to a lot of these unhealthy patterns and or environments that our collective consciousness has created. So when we talk about knowing thyself and what is the practicality of knowing thyself, I mean, on a very super basic, superficial level, it's really like, how does our physical body work? What is the components that we need for our optimal physical health, mental health, emotional health, just the basics? What is the basic human need for these things? And how do we give it to ourselves? And how do we create a society and a culture that is supporting our physical, mental, emotional health? And that moves into the leadership realm where you're talking about. And what I'm seeing from my perspective, from my environment and the places that I put myself, is that there are more and more and more and more people like yourself that have grown up and identified themselves with the normal things, such as growing business industry, history, finances, lawyers, doctors. I am meeting in my really super far out woo-woo communities. I am meeting these people. I'm meeting head CEOs of banks and financial industries. I am meeting the highest class brain surgeons. I am meeting international lawyers in these groups where we go out and where we put we go out for like 7 days into the wilderness and we cover ourselves with mud for a shamanic experience. I've got bankers, financial institutions, lawyers, international lawyers, these people are coming to remember the old ways, and they are strategically planted by what I believe is like their own divine alliance or alignment. They're strategically placed in these places, such as hospitals, the law, the finances, the historical realm, the CEOs. They're planted in these places to begin the anchoring of this higher consciousness, which is about self-awareness, expansion, limitlessness. And as you're sharing about, how do we direct this God force energy, this divine child of the divine, limitless potential? How do we direct this into more impactful ways for the greater good?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's funny how I think sometimes we need to go backwards to go forward. And none of these ideas we're talking about are new. These
Right.
are ideas that have been around for a long time. And I've been reading a book. David Hawking's one that's really into this conscious leadership idea. And he's, many of you've seen this experiment, so I'll just briefly explain it, where you use, is it kinesthesiology? Can't say that word. Anyway,
Yeah, that was
where,
right.
yeah, hey, I'm pretty good. If I put my arms out to my side and you come and push on my arms when you make a statement that's either true or false or whatever, and I say, okay, I am 35 years old, and you push on my arms, they're going to collapse because it isn't true.
Right.
But if you give me my real age, my arms will hold firm. Now, interestingly enough, I had quite a bit of pain this in a year or two ago in my back, and I ended up at an acupuncturist, and I was like, what does this have to do with acupuncture? And he was into all these ancient wisdom kind of ideas, and he he was he didn't speak really good English, and I don't speak whatever language he was speaking, so we were having major communication disconnects. But he was testing foods on me. He would just say, and this was the one that was most interesting to me, was a banana. He said something about a ripe banana, and my arms held firm. And when he said something about a green banana, my arms, collapsed. I guess the point was ripe bananas are better for you than, green bananas. And trust me, we went through literally like 30 or 40 different foods, maybe even more. And I was trying really hard to prove him wrong, that I could hold my arms up, and not collapse when things weren't true, or when things weren't accurate. And it wasn't necessarily, I think a lot of it has to do too with how your body responds to certain things. So my body may respond slightly different than someone else's to certain foods. And he was trying to identify which foods, because maybe he thought some of these foods were contributing to my pain. And anyway, David Hawking, going back to that, uses this methodology. He has this map of consciousness. And when you're at the lowest levels of consciousness, you live in a world with a lot of shame and guilt and those types of feelings. And he uses this methodology to determine your levels of consciousness. And he has done extensive research and proven that even like the Einsteins and the really brilliant people in the world only manifest at about a level 400, between 4 and 500. And there's 0 to 1,000.
Mm.
And he's not a religious person. And so when you ask him, like, okay, who manifested 1,000? And I don't know how he proves this, because he didn't live when Christ lived, but he said Jesus was one of the only people that has ever lived that has manifested at the highest levels of consciousness. Other ones that, you would expect would be like Gandhi and Mother Teresa and people like that. So his point was that these people we live in a world of people who are super intelligent, but yet when it comes to these higher levels of consciousness, they only manifest about halfway up the ladder. It's when you get into these people who really have very well developed practices of mindfulness and serving other people and reaching outside of themselves. They're the people that achieve these higher levels of consciousness. And I found this, it said mindful leadership is about being present in the moment, making decisions with clarity and intention, and cultivating a sense of compassion and understanding toward others. It involves self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and the ability to lead with authenticity and integrity. Mindful leaders are able to create a positive work environment, inspire their teams, and make ethical decisions that benefit both the company and society as a whole. And I thought, as I see society, and I find it interesting what you said, how you're going to these, what we sometimes see as these far out kind of experiences. And who's there? All of these people that you wouldn't expect to be there, people who
Right.
are very profit driven, kind of that's their main thing is making money kind of thing. I think these leaders are starting to recognize that, hey, we are moving into an era where, although your smartphone could bring down a plane, chances are you don't know enough to do it. So it's not that much of a threat. Where AI does not have to necessarily, you don't have to know that much about AI to utilize AI in a really harmful way.
Yeah.
And so as we start building these companies and organizations, we need to be very mindful of these types of things. And we need people who are operating on a level where they, are ethical and moral and they care. And it's, a side benefit, I guess, if you want to call it that, is, employees are happy to work there. People get along better. You don't go to work every day just like, oh, I read something the other day, quote that you love your job when Sunday night rolls around and you're not just like dreading getting up the next day or something. I can't remember the quote, but I thought that's so true. How many of us on Sunday night are just like, oh, I have to go to work tomorrow?
Yeah.
You know, where we can live in a world where we feel like what we're doing in our everyday life is actually, it sounds kind of cheesy for lack of a better word, that we're making a difference, that what we're doing is actually contributing to the greater good of society. And sure, we make a living, and sure, we talked a little bit about what if there was no time and there was no space. Well, what if there was no money? What if money, if we all just worked at our jobs because we loved it, and we all somehow had our needs, our basic needs met, and our wants, and I say this in a way because everybody's like, oh, well, what if you have more than me? Well, think about this for a minute. You love living by the lake. I love living in the mountains. Somebody may want a great big huge house. I personally don't want a great big huge house because I don't want to take care of that great big huge house. Somebody may not want to live on my property because this property of mine has a smaller house, but it also has a lot of property, but that property is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody else may be more comfortable living in a neighborhood where they have a small, lot. So if we have our needs and our wants met by some magical force,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't have to worry about how much money we made all the time, and we could pursue things that were of interest to us and where we felt like, hey, I'm actually feel like I'm making a meaningful impact in the world around me. What would life be like? So I'll throw that back to you.
I think that I shouldn't even say that. I sense what I sense and what is being sort of confirmed by again, I'm just going to call it the mirror of life because this is what I've come to experience it as. But what I've observed, what I sense, and what I put my faith in is that we are evolving as a collective.
Yes.
That there's plenty of people out there that are completely and totally aware of the different situations and issues that need to be addressed, and that the human conscious collective is beginning to wake up and take responsibility for shifting these. So what I think, this was something that came up into my mind in the very beginning of our conversation today was, I think that the old way of being, when we're talking about ancient wisdom, I think that the old way of being had a cycle. And in that cycle, in the old way of being, where we had this direct connection with God, with God's source, with divine source. And if you don't like that word, you can just call it life, right? So life force energy. There is one unified life force energy that is expressing through everyone and everything. So there is a life force energy that is expressing as a tree, as a dog, as a cat, as a bird, as an insect, as myself, as yourself. There's this life force energy. And that life force energy that animates all things, that is what I personally consider to be that God source energy. And at one point in history, we all individually had access to our connection to it, our symbiosis with it, meaning that we could communicate with it. And we still can, it's absolutely there. But at some point in history, it began to shift. And we spoke about in the last conversation, we spoke about the kind of religious dogmatic power grab that happened in many, many areas all over the world. And we can give examples, right? Where there was the Crusades, and the Crusades were the Catholics that went all across Europe slaughtering villages, and the priests and priestesses or medicine men and wise women, the shamans, like anyone that would question the authority of the church over their own sovereignty. And so there was this mass slaughtering of these individuals or groups that would not give their power away to the dogma of the church, to the authority over the church. And so they were killed, and and their stuff was taken, and it made a lot of people very, very rich and wealthy. And what happened was, then the scientific revolution came along, and our minds were drawn into this scientific explanation of the universe, which was very, very helpful for a lot of systems or education or intelligence that we needed, such as, I mean, just the fact of being able to see bacteria and viruses and how antibacterials and penicillins worked, right? So just getting a scientific understanding of the physical world and how it works is very, very important. And then the pendulum has swung right into that science, logic, logician, so that our minds have closed into that. This is, once again, this is the only way. This is the only reality. Where I think that we're moving as a collective now into the blending of these two things, into the blending of scientific medicine with holistic medicine. And holistic medicine is not necessarily, it is acupuncture, it is massage therapy, it is aromatherapy, it is all of those things, but it's more holistic, is more whole. It's taking into account the greater aspects of our being and how they affect our physical health, such as stress, right? So let's just talk about, if you are in a stressful home environment where there's a lot of negativity and or verbal emotional abuse, and you're existing in that, and you're compensating for that, and you're compromising yourself for the security of that, there is a physical toll that's happening on your physical body and your physical health because of the stress of the environment that you are subjecting yourself to, or believe that you're trapped in, or believe that you have to sacrifice yourself for in order to get whatever the benefits are. So looking at what our beliefs are, coming back to knowing ourselves, what we believe we, or should say, becoming self-aware of what our beliefs are and where we may be jeopardizing our wellness, our whole well-being in order to get something. What is it that we want to get out of this situation? What do we sacrifice, and what am I sacrificing, and what am I getting, and why am I doing this? So just that, so we're talking about holistic health and also self-awareness. So the holistic medical community is about all of those things, like, oh, wow, you've got some trauma in your shoulder. And as we start to unwrap that trauma in your shoulder, we find that this occurred, that this incident occurred when you were 6 years old, and it was never brought into light. Nobody hugged you. Nobody was there for you. Nobody told you it was going to be okay. Nobody held you while you cried so you could release the emotion at 6 years old. You didn't have that support. And so what happened was you buried it. You put it away. You said, I don't have time for this. I can't feel this right now. I don't know how to process this at 6 years old. And so your body, the wisdom of your physical body, said, you know what, baby, I'll hold that for you until you're ready for it. And then 30 years later, 40 years later, you've got this incredible pain in your shoulder and you don't know where it came from. So you go to a doctor and they prescribe and they do tests and they work on the physical. And that might help for a little bit. They can shoot you up with some cortisone or some steroids, and that'll put a Band-Aid on it so you don't have to feel that pain anymore. Or you can go to a holistic person and really start to unwind what's in there and what just needs to be seen, loved, heard, acknowledged, and released. And you may get not only the same result, but a better result. And this is what guy out there that's very, very famous, actually. His name is Joe Dispenza. And Joe Dispenza, he's got a whole website. If anyone out listening has got some physical health issues that you would like to address from a holistic perspective, Joe Dispenza is one of the first individuals that has been scientifically testing the ancient wisdoms and how the ancient wisdoms translate into physical body health. And so to answer the question and the topic, I think that we're moving into an era where we're beginning to blend the science and the spiritual, or the ancient wisdom practices of connectedness, wholeness, unity, with scientific data as well. And I believe that that is going to be the answer that we're going to need to bring our collective human consciousness into its next stage of enlightenment, and or the basic, what you're talking about, where all people's basic needs are met, where there's happiness, wholeness, wellness, instead of the incredible mental health crisis that we're seeing just in our culture in the United States right now, that's leading people into all kinds of substance abuse problems and other kinds of addictions to cope.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I know this, as you're saying things, the things that are going through my mind aren't necessarily a direct, it's not like, oh, this is an extension of what you're saying. But what it made me think of is, we've lived in a world, and as you were talking about, especially like the Crusades and religion, I think there's good and bad corporations, there's good and bad governments, there's good and bad religions, there's good and bad everything, right? That's just what there is. I mean, that's life. And I think as I've studied history for, millennia, I mean, not that I've been alive that long, but, looking back millennia.
Could be many lifetimes.
I could be. That's true. I could
be
be
a historian over many lifetimes. Yeah.
is that, for a long time, people lived in these little small tribes, and then we moved into more communities. And as we moved, into a more communal type environment, we started relying on institutions. And as people have come to rely on institutions, these institutions invariably gain power. And as they gain power, we all heard, power corrupts, and it really does. And as these institutions have become corrupt and caused a lot of the problems, you just think about a corporation who maybe unwittingly, unknowingly, initially started polluting the waters with these microplastics and things. But then as they became aware of it, it's like, oh, we're too invested in making money, and who cares? And not realizing that they themselves are drinking that same water that they're polluting, and they don't see the immediate negative impact. So they, just think, oh, well, it must not be that big of a deal. But I think what we're seeing is a move away from trusting institutions, and I'm not saying we shouldn't trust science. I'm not saying we shouldn't trust the medical industrial complex. We shouldn't trust government. We shouldn't trust religion. We shouldn't trust corporations. I'm saying we should be skeptical. I do believe, a healthy dose of skepticism doesn't hurt anyone. But I think that we're moving toward a more decentralized way of living. And I think that's good. I think it started, the real push was when crypto first came on the market, and Bitcoin. If you understand anything about Bitcoin and crypto, you understand that it's a very decentralized way of making money. And it's a way where, like, I'm not independently wealthy, never have been, but my husband was one of the first to own a Bitcoin miner in our basement. We we mined our own Bitcoin before Bitcoin was even a thing, before people had ever even heard of the word, because his boss did. And so, but it made me understand more about the blockchain. And I won't get into all the details of that because it's a conversation for another day. But it made me recognize the value of decentralization. And I think that we have come to a point in society, because we can take the collective wisdom of the ages and combine it with the wisdom that we have now, that we may not need to rely on these institutions. We may not need to, they may be a benefit to us, but we won't need to rely on them. I don't need to have a job working for a Fortune 500 company to make a living. I don't need to rely on, the pharmaceutical industry to provide me with medicines, because I can grow them on my own property, because I understand the benefits of ancient wisdom. My husband's always out there. He's like, oh, look at this is natural pepper. I don't know what kind of pepper it is, but it grows in our yard. And he's always taking this pepper and doing whatever, putting it in his salad. And of course, we all know you can eat dandelions. And he's got books upon books about all the things you can eat on our property. And I never had any clue that we could eat all this stuff. I'm like, wow, we're in pretty good shape if, the zombie apocalypse happens. And so I think that, we are in a unique position where, like I said, we can take all this ancient wisdom, we can combine it with modern day understanding of things and utilize it. We can take the idea of these institutions and know that there's a time and a place for them, but we don't need to rely on them. We don't depend on them to live every day, and we can live more independent and be more self-sufficient, and know that, say, for example, I have a health issue, and I go to a doctor and they give me a generic solution because I gave them some generic symptoms. And instead I can say, wow, look at all the things I know about my own body. Look at all the things I know about all of the different medicinal herbs that are out there. Here's all the things I know about various medications. And I can say, knowing my own body, knowing my own lifestyle, knowing all of this information that I have about myself that no doctor's ever going to know, I can make decisions. And that decision will probably be better for me than going and getting these generic solutions that we don't realize are very generic, to be honest. So
Yeah, that's a really great point. And coming back to knowing thyself, you said during that, you said power corrupts. And that's one of those words that the word combinations that we throw around. Power corrupts, power corrupts, power corrupts. And it's true that earthly power corrupts. And for a long time, and I think that this is true for many of us, because we've heard this power corrupts, there's a resistance within a lot of us to actually claim power for ourselves.
mhm.
And earthly power corrupts. Yes, possibly. Doesn't need to.
No.
Doesn't need to. But the power that you have within your own being, the power of your sovereignty, the power of connection to yourself and your own guidance, not only does that not corrupt, but that actually empowers the individual to make the changes necessary in their lives to become whatever it is that they're desiring to become, shift and change in their lives, whatever it is that they are desiring to shift and change. So we talk about this a lot in the more spiritual conversations, where there's an idea that there's a program that we've received, and I apologize for people that don't like this terminology, but I like to use the word program because it really reflects how our brain works. Our brain is like a computer. What you put into it is what you get out of it. And so it is really important throughout your day that you're observant about the information that you're taking in, because that formulates within you your experience in the world. So I learned a long time ago that my energy body, my emotional body, I cannot handle the news. Watching the news when I was 7, I turned it off at 17 years old, and every once in a while I catch glimpses of it. But it's basically just this barrage of negativity and all the things wrong with the world and all the horrible people that are behaving horribly. So I just cannot let that in to my system, because it really depresses me. It really messes up my mental health. I lose hope in humanity. I lose faith in humanity when I'm going into these wormholes. But coming back to this whole idea of power corrupts, earthly power, there's this term of horizontal power, horizontal sourcing versus vertical alignment and vertical sourcing. So going back to this program, most of us from a very early age, I'm going to say probably the majority of people from a very early age, childhood, we were taught to get what we wanted from outside of ourselves. And that was a natural way of being. As an infant, you needed to get fed from outside of yourself. You needed to get love from outside of yourself. You needed to get knowledge and wisdom and education from outside of yourself. So your needs were met as an infant and a small child from the external, from your external world. And most of us have never grown out of this experience. So we're always seeking to get what we want from the outside world. And that is, and when we see a lack in our experience, then we're blaming it on the outside world, or we're trying to trade our time, our energy, our source, our power for our validation, for whatever it is that we're wanting to get from the outside world, seeking externally. And that is the power that corrupts. Because if we do not have the power within ourselves, if we do not source vibrationally what we need from within ourselves, then we'll always be seeking. And that's where the greed comes from. And that's where the corruption comes from. This feeling of lack within our own being. And it creates a desire for accumulation and hoarding and power over, control over, so that we can continue to sustain and we can continue to get and we can continue to source what we need from the external environment. And what we're shifting into, what's available, I should say, as an alternative, is to source that which we want from within our own being. And we do that through our imagination, through putting ourselves in the place of already having it. For instance, if we are seeking love, this is a real easy one. If we're seeking love, we want to get love, we want to get validation from our people around us. And if we're always looking for that, always grasping for that, there's a lot of coping mechanisms. There's a lot of programs that are running on underneath the surface. We're exchanging, we're giving away parts of ourselves in order to get love, or the feeling of love, or the feeling of validation. But a lot of these things, such as love, joy, peace, wisdom, well-being, abundance, all of this stuff is a vibration. It's a feeling tone. And we can all, as adults, as conscious individuals, we can all learn how to source this within ourselves. And then when we have it, when I have the feeling of love, of loving myself, of being able to express love thoroughly and truly through my being, I do not need the external source because I already have it. And so because I already have it, the external world actually refigures itself to reflect back to me that which I already have. And that, all you beautiful people out there, that is power. That is power. To claim what it is that you want as already having, and to be in the experience and the vibration of already having, and claiming it. That is your power. That is your empowerment. And then moving in the direction, creating the actions, behaviors that reflect you already having along the way. And then seeing it in your reality, because it will come. It will come to you. That which you are creating within yourself will come to you. It has to. And then you know true power. And when you know the true power of your own being, your own sovereignty, your own God, goddess, divine child self, then money, wealth, power, external stuff, it holds such a lesser value, such a lesser value. There's this great book out there called Power versus Force.
Yep.
And I believe, yeah. And that one breaks it down in a real logical way for you mental people out there that really love to hang out in the mental space. Power versus Force is an incredible book that starts to help to differentiate when we're seeking externally, we're trying to make happen externally versus claiming that internal power within.
Yes, and it's interesting because that book by David Hawking, that's what I was talking about, and he maps out the levels of consciousness, and he talks about love, and not from an emotion perspective, like, oh, I'm in love with somebody, or even, oh, I love my baby, which, both are very valid emotions and feelings. But he said love, when you get to love is one of the defining characteristics as you get to these higher levels of consciousness, and it is a vibration. It truly is. It's an energy. It's not something, I mean, I hate to say you don't feel it, because you do. It's, a feeling and an emotion, but you experience it. It's something different than just feeling and emotion. And yeah, I like his work, and I like, the more I understood these levels of consciousness and how you get from one to the next, really has helped me better define my own world. And on that final note, I really like this also. It was talking about cultivating spiritual intelligence as opposed to just the intelligence we acquire through, knowledge. Is spiritual intelligence is the ability to connect with a deeper sense of purpose and meaning in life. In the context of our lives, cultivating spiritual intelligence involves reflecting one's own values, beliefs, and motivations. By tapping into this inner wisdom, we can make decisions that are aligned with our higher purpose and create a sense of fulfillment and satisfaction. And I think that's a great note to end on. So once,
I'd like to just share one more
yeah,
thing for your peeps. And coming back to knowing thyself, I just want to let you guys know that knowing thyself, you're an onion. You have many, 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 many layers of your being. You're not just one thing. And there's so much more to you than you can possibly even imagine. And as you continue on this exploration of self-growth and self-knowledge, it is never ending. So there's no end point. So wherever you are is totally, completely perfect. And as you step forward into your next area of growth, you get to learn more about yourself and you get to dissolve more limiting beliefs and more limiting programs. And then you move to the next level and you meet the same kinds of things, but a little bit different. And so it's an onion, everyone. And, if you want, if you dig my vibe, come into my world. I've got a whole ton of videos on YouTube. You get to watch me sort of process my own perfectly imperfect way of navigating in this world with my feet on both in the world and but not of the world kind of thing. Yeah. And private sessions help you really get into deeper what's going on within you, where those limiting beliefs are, what's your next level of growth. And just like last time, we have the free gift that is the activation of the crown chakra to open up your spiritual channel and your spiritual guidance. And so I just want to just share all my love to all you listeners out there who are on this path of growth. It's exciting. It's amazing. It's liberating. And yeah, welcome. I encourage you to keep going.
yes, and it's powerful. And all Zara's information will be included in the show notes. So I encourage you to go to her YouTube channel and reach out to her and get to know her a little bit more. Even if you choose not to engage with her services or my services or whatever, I think just getting to know each other and connecting with people increases our level of spiritual intelligence and just creates a better world for all of us to live in. We don't all have to, I hate to say this, but like buy services. I have found that the most meaningful relationships I have are oftentimes things where I just engage with people and have conversations like today. I felt a really strong connection, and that connection, I believe, has enhanced my life, even just, through our conversations. So I appreciate your time. And if you have any one last final thought, I'll let you have the last word.
Yeah, Cheryl, thank you so much. And I appreciate everything that you just said, which is, I love having these conversations with people. And a lot of those videos on my YouTube channel are just like a free service, meditations and such like that. So it's a really great resource without needing to buy anything. And final words is just thank you so much, Cheryl, for this invitation and this opportunity to hang out with you and your audience. It's been a beautiful, really beautiful, aligned, expanded experience. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Like I said, every time we connect with somebody on this level, I think the energy around us just expands. So thanks so much.